Michael drummed his fingers against the steering wheel as he turned onto Maple Avenue, the familiar stretch of suburbia where he'd spent his childhood. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across manicured lawns, and the spring air carried the scent of freshly cut grass through his open window. He'd made this drive countless times, but today felt different, heavier somehow, as if the universe knew something he didn't. His wedding ring caught the sunlight as he adjusted his grip on the wheel. 7 years of marriage, and lately things had felt off. Little things. His wife working late more often, missing their usual Sunday brunches, keeping her phone face down on the table. He'd brushed it all aside, telling himself he was being paranoid. After all, they'd built a life together. She wouldn't throw that away. The gravel crunched under his tires as he pulled into his parents' driveway. The 2-story colonial looked exactly as it had when he was growing up. His mother's prized roses still lined the walkway, and his father's ancient wind chimes still hung from the front porch. He'd called ahead, but no one had answered. Not unusual for a Tuesday afternoon, when his parents typically ran errands. Just a quick stop, he muttered to himself, reaching for his coffee in the cup holder. Grab the books and go. The garage keypad accepted his code with a familiar beep. As the door groaned upward, the musty smell of cardboard and old memories wafted out. His mother's organizational skills were on full display. Boxes stacked precisely, each labeled in her neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, tax records 2015 to 2020, Jake's trophies. He noticed there wasn't a box for his own achievements. Michael moved deeper into the garage, scanning the labels. The college textbooks he needed would be somewhere in the back, probably buried under years of accumulated family history. His foot knocked against something metal. Jake's old baseball bat, still preserved like a precious relic. His mother had kept everything of Jake's, while Michael's belongings had slowly disappeared over the years, relegated to garage sales or donation bins. A car door slammed somewhere nearby. He paused, a box half lifted in his arms. The sound had come from the back of the house, where visitors rarely parked. Then he heard it. Laughter. His wife's laugh, musical and light, followed by a deeper chuckle he knew as well as his own voice. The box slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, landing with a dull thud on the concrete floor. That couldn't be right. His wife was supposed to be at work, giving a quarterly presentation to her department. And Jake lived across town, had no reason to be here on a Tuesday afternoon. Moving to the small window at the back of the garage, Michael wiped away years of dust with his sleeve. His heart pounded against his ribs as he peered out, praying he was wrong, that his mind was playing tricks on him. The scene that greeted him shattered his world in an instant. There they were, walking hand in hand through his parents' backyard. His college sweetheart, his partner of 9 years, his wife of 7, pressed close against his younger brother Jake. They moved with the easy intimacy of longtime companions, their bodies aligned as if they'd practiced this dance 1,000 times before. Jake leaned down, whispered something in her ear. She threw her head back and laughed, reaching up to brush his cheek with her free hand. The gesture was so casual, so familiar, it made Michael's stomach turn. This wasn't a first-time thing. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was routine. The box he dropped had spilled its contents across the floor. Old calculus textbooks, physics notes, remnants of a life when everything made sense. One book had fallen open, pages bent beneath its own weight. Michael stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. The equations on the exposed pages swam before his eyes, variables and constants blurring together like his thoughts. Then a sudden clarity cut through his shock. He needed to see more, needed to understand just how deep this betrayal went. His legs carried him automatically toward the house's back door, his footsteps echoing in the garage like drumbeats counting down to confrontation. The kitchen door opened silently. He'd fixed that squeak himself last summer, one of many household repairs he'd done to help his parents. The irony of that maintenance making it easier to catch his wife's infidelity wasn't lost on him. His mother stood at the counter, arranging flowers in a crystal vase he recognized as a wedding gift from his wife's parents. White chrysanthemums, his wife's favorite flowers. How many times had his mother arranged these flowers for their secret meetings? Michael. His mother startled, nearly dropping the flower she was holding. I didn't expect you today. Her voice held a note of panic he'd never heard before. Before he could respond, the back door opened. Jake entered first, his confident stride faltering slightly when he saw Michael. His wife followed, her face draining of color so quickly she seemed to age years in seconds. Time seemed to freeze as they all stared at each other, the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny accusers. The only sound was the gentle ticking of his mother's antique wall clock, counting down the seconds until someone broke this terrible silence. Through the window behind them, Michael could see the garden where he and Jake had played as children, where he had proposed to his wife on Christmas Eve 7 years ago, where his mother had hosted countless family barbecues. All those memories felt tainted now, corrupted by whatever had been happening here while his back was turned. What the hell is this? His voice came out as a hoarse whisper, each word scraping against his throat like broken glass. His mother quickly stepped between them, her hands raised placatingly. The gesture seemed rehearsed, as if she'd anticipated this moment. Now, Michael, let's all stay calm. Calm. The word tasted like acid in his mouth. Each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. You knew about this. His mother's expression shifted from concern to something harder, more familiar, the look she'd given him countless times growing up when he'd disappointed her. These things happen, dear. Sometimes people just grow apart. Grow apart. Michael stared at his mother in disbelief, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. They were sneaking around in your backyard. In my parents' house. Don't be dramatic, his mother said, her tone taking on that dismissive edge he'd heard so many times before. She adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous habit he'd noticed whenever she was about to say something particularly cruel. Your wife has needs, Michael. If you'd taken better care of yourself instead of letting yourself go. The words hit him like physical blows. He looked down at himself. True, he'd gained some weight since college, maybe 30 pounds. The long hours at his accounting firm meant more takeout and less gym time. But to hear his own mother use that to justify this betrayal. Mom. Jake stepped forward, placing a hand on their mother's shoulder. The gesture screamed of practiced familiarity, of countless private conversations Michael hadn't been privy to. Thanks for understanding. We didn't want him to find out this way, but maybe it's for the best. Michael's wife hadn't said a word. She stood slightly behind Jake, her hand clutching the back of his shirt like an anchor. The gesture was so intimate, so familiar, it made Michael's stomach turn. How many times had she held on to Jake like that? How many times had they laughed about him behind his back? How long? He demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Jake met his eyes with an almost pitying look, the same expression he'd worn when Michael had lost the state championships in high school. Does it matter? How long? 3 months. His wife finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. She stepped forward slightly, though she kept one hand on Jake's shirt. We didn't plan it, Michael. It just happened. Just happened. Michael's laugh was bitter, brittle. In my parents' house, with my own brother. Where else were they supposed to meet? His mother interjected, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. She began rearranging the flowers in the vase, her movements precise and controlled. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere she could sort out her feelings without judgment. The implications of her words slowly sank in, each realization another knife in his gut. You've been helping them, covering for them. His mother lifted her chin, pearl necklace gleaming in the afternoon light. I've been supporting 2 people I care about who found happiness together. If you'd been more attentive, more like your brother, more like Jake. Michael cut her off, his voice rising. Your perfect son, who's sleeping with his brother's wife. "Watch your tone," his mother snapped, her facade of calm cracking slightly. "This kind of aggressive behavior is exactly why." "Why what, Mom?" Michael snarled. "Why you decided to help my brother steal my wife. Why you've always taken his side. Why nothing I do is ever good enough for you." Jake's smug smile was the final straw. "Come on, bro. You had to know she was out of your league from the start. Remember how surprised everyone was when she said yes to your proposal?" Michael's fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white with restraint. The urge to lunge at his brother, to wipe that self-satisfied look off his face, was almost overwhelming. But something deeper, colder, was taking root inside him. This wasn't just betrayal, it was conspiracy. His own family had conspired against him. "You're all dead to me," he said, his voice deadly calm. The words felt like ice in his mouth, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. "All of you." "Don't be melodramatic," his mother sighed, turning back to her flowers. "This isn't helping anyone. Why don't we all sit down and discuss this like adults? I made your favorite coffee cake this morning." "Discuss what?" Michael's voice cracked like a whip. "How you helped my brother seduce my wife. How you gave him a place to meet behind my back. Or should we discuss how you're actually defending them?" His wife stepped forward, reaching for his arm. "Michael, please." He jerked away from her touch as if it burned, backing up until he hit the counter. Don't you dare touch me." "This is exactly why she came to me," Jake said, wrapping an arm around Michael's wife's shoulders. The possessive gesture made bile rise in Michael's throat. "You've always had anger issues, bro. She deserves better than walking on eggshells around you." "Anger issues?" Michael's laugh was hollow. "You slept with my wife. And I'm the one with issues." "Language," his mother snapped. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Jake would never what? Never betray his family. Never lie. Never sneak around like a coward." "That's enough." His mother's voice rose sharply. "I won't have you speaking to your brother that way in my house." Michael looked at each of them in turn. His mother's disapproving frown, Jake's smug superiority, his wife's guilty but defiant expression. Everything he thought he knew about his family was crumbling around him, revealing the rot that had always lurked beneath the surface. "You know what? Keep her," he said to Jake, each word precise and measured. "You deserve each other. And Mom, congratulations. You finally have the perfect family you always wanted." "Michael, wait," his wife called after him, but he was already walking away. "Let him go," he heard Jake say. "He'll calm down eventually. He always does." "I'll make some tea." His mother's voice followed him. "Jake, dear, help me with these flowers." Their voices faded as Michael walked out, each step carrying him further from the life he'd thought he had. In the driveway, he got into his car and sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The afternoon sun still shone cheerfully, birds still sang in the trees, and his mother's roses still bloomed by the front walk. The world hadn't ended, even though it felt like it should have. But something had ended: his trust, his marriage, his place in this family. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and meticulous investigation. Michael threw himself into understanding exactly what had happened, how long this betrayal had been festering beneath the surface of his seemingly normal life. Each new discovery was another crack in the foundation of everything he believed about his family. His first stop was a private investigator's office in downtown, a discreet storefront wedged between a coffee shop and a bail bonds office. The investigator, a former police detective named Martinez, listened without judgment as Michael laid out what he knew. 3 months, they admitted to, Michael said, sliding an envelope of cash across the desk. "I want to know how long it really was." Martinez nodded, pocketing the envelope without counting it. "They always minimize. Give me a week." That week stretched into 3 as the evidence mounted. Michael created a war room in his apartment's spare bedroom, pinning bank statements and phone records to corkboards, connecting events with red string like a detective in a crime drama. But this wasn't fiction. This was his life. And each new discovery was another knife in his back. The affair hadn't started 3 months ago. That was just when they'd gotten sloppy enough to almost get caught. Martinez's investigation uncovered restaurant charges and hotel bookings going back at least 6 months. Security footage showed Jake and Michael's wife meeting for lunch dates, shopping trips, weekend getaways disguised as work conferences. But the real betrayal lay in the text messages Martinez recovered, dozens of conversations between his wife and his mother, planning their meetups, coordinating schedules to avoid detection. His mother hadn't just covered for them. She'd been the architect of it all. "Your Tuesday book club is perfect," one message from his mother read. "Michael never questions it, and Jake can slip out of work early." Another, "Don't worry about the Christmas party. I'll keep Michael busy in the kitchen while you and Jake get some time alone." And the most stunning, "He takes after his father, always so oblivious. Some men just can't see what's right in front of them." Michael stared at the messages until the words burned into his retinas. His mother had orchestrated everything, from providing alibis to creating opportunities for their meetings. She'd hosted weekly coffee dates with his wife that were really covers for meetings with Jake. She'd helped them create alibis, warned them when Michael was asking questions, even advised them on how to handle them when the truth finally came out. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd initially imagined. It wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic campaign to deceive him, orchestrated by his own mother. The more he discovered, the more his anger crystallized into something harder, colder, more focused. One evening, as he was going through another stack of bank statements Martinez had obtained, something caught his eye. An old medical bill tucked between pages of account summaries. It was from 34 years ago, around the time of his birth. But it wasn't a hospital bill. It was from New Horizons Adoption Agency. Michael's hands trembled as he held the yellowed paper. The letterhead was faded, but the words were still clear. Final placement fee. Infant male. The date matched his birth month exactly. He sat back in his chair, the room suddenly spinning around him. Memories flooded his mind, taking on new meaning in light of this discovery. His mother's constant comparisons between him and Jake, the way she'd always emphasized how Jake had her eyes, her smile, while Michael just looked like himself. The family photos where he seemed slightly out of place, his features never quite matching his parents' or Jake's. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, running a hand through his hair. The weight of this new revelation pressed down on his chest like a stone. It explained everything. His mother's lifelong favoritism, her quick defense of Jake's betrayal, the casual cruelty she'd always shown toward him. He wasn't her son. He was an outsider, an intruder in the perfect family she'd wanted. With hands that shook slightly, he opened his laptop and navigated to a DNA testing services website. 4 kits, he decided. 1 for himself, 1 for Jake, and 2 for his parents. Getting their samples would be tricky, but he'd figure something out. He had to know the truth. He spent the next hour creating a detailed plan in his notebook. His mother's weekly bridge club would provide an opportunity to collect DNA from their coffee cups. Jake's gym habit meant regular water bottle disposal. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing about this situation had been easy. As he wrote, his phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. "Got something big. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Michael stared at the message, then at the adoption agency bill, then at the wall of evidence he'd assembled. This wasn't just about his wife's infidelity anymore. This was about his entire identity, about decades of lies and manipulation. Every memory of his childhood now needed to be re-examined through this new lens. He thought about all the times his mother had praised Jake while criticizing him, all the family gatherings where he'd felt slightly out of place but couldn't explain why, all the subtle ways she'd shown her preference for her real son while treating Michael like an obligation, a charity case she'd taken on and now regretted. "You've always been different," She told him once during a particularly heated argument in his teenage years. At the time, he'd taken it as another criticism. Now he understood it had been a confession. Sitting in his apartment, surrounded by evidence of his family's betrayal, Michael made a promise to himself. He would uncover every lie, expose every secret, and make them all pay for what they'd done to him. The game they'd started with their betrayal was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. They thought they'd broken him, but they'd only succeeded in setting him free, freed from the obligations of family loyalty, free from the constraints of conventional morality. They had created their own worst nightmare, and soon they would understand exactly what that meant. Michael smiled as he began to plan his next move. In his mind, he could already see the dominoes falling one by one, each revelation leading to another, until their carefully constructed world of lies came crashing down around them. They had no idea what was coming. Michael sat across from Detective Martinez in the investigator's cramped office, watching as the older man spread photos across his desk. Early morning sunlight filtered through dusty Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the evidence of Jake's secret life. "Your brother's been busy," Martin said, tapping one photo showing Jake entering an underground casino. 3 visits last week alone, always during his supposed lunch meetings. "Tell me everything." Michael leaned forward, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. Martinez pulled out a thick folder. "Jake's got a gambling problem. A big one. He's been hitting underground poker games, illegal betting rings, the works. Based on my sources, he's in deep with some dangerous people." "How deep?" $200,000 minimum. Maybe more. Martinez slid over a spreadsheet of transactions. He's been moving money around, trying to cover his tracks, using company accounts to pay his debts. Michael studied the numbers, his accountant's mind quickly spotting the patterns. He's embezzling from his own firm, cooking the books like a master chef. Martinez handed him another document. He's created fake vendors, ghost contracts, the whole 9 yards, been doing it for months. His partners don't suspect anything. They trust him. That's always the key, isn't it? Michael's smile was grim, just like I trusted him. Martinez nodded. "Your brother's not just a cheater in his personal life. He's dirty all the way through." Michael absorbed this information, his mind already calculating angles, seeing possibilities. "Can you get me proof? Something concrete?" "Already did." Martinez patted a USB drive on his desk. "Everything's here. Bank records, witness statements, photos, recordings. Enough to ruin him professionally, and maybe even put him behind bars." "Perfect." Michael reached for his checkbook. "What else?" "There's more, about your wife and mother." Martinez hesitated. "You sure you want to hear it?" "Every detail." Martinez pulled out his phone, playing a recorded conversation. His wife's voice filled the small office. "I can't keep lying to him, Emma. Michael suspects something." His mother's reply was cold. "Then you're not trying hard enough." Michael's always been slow to catch on, just like when he was a child. "Remember what we discussed about the trust fund?" The recording continued, revealing a conversation about accessing Michael's inheritance early, plans to have him declared mentally unstable if he discovered the truth, his own mother and wife plotting to steal not just his marriage, but everything he had. "Those monsters," Michael's whisper was barely audible. "They were planning to take everything." "There's one more thing." Martinez handed him a final document. "I did some digging into that adoption agency lead you mentioned. Found this in their archived records." Michael stared at the paperwork, his hands trembling slightly. The document confirmed everything. He'd been adopted through New Horizons Agency 34 years ago. But there was more. His biological parents hadn't given him up willingly. There were irregularities in the paperwork, suggestions of coercion and bribery. "Your mother," Martinez said carefully, "used her family's influence to push through the adoption. There were other families ahead of them on the waiting list, but money talked. The whole thing was technically legal, but ethically. She bought me. Michael's voice was ice cold, like a designer handbag, then spent the rest of my life regretting her purchase. What are you going to do? Michael stood, gathering the evidence into his briefcase. I'm going to destroy them. All of them. But I need to be smart about it. He turned to Martinez. I need you to keep digging. Every skeleton, every secret, every weakness. I want it all. This kind of revenge, Martinez warned, it can consume you. Michael's smile was sharp enough to cut. Good, because I'm just getting started. He pulled out his phone, checking his calendar. Jake has a partners meeting next week. Time to light the first fuse. As he left Martinez's office, Michael's mind raced with possibilities. The evidence against Jake was just the beginning. He had the tools now to dismantle their entire world. Piece by piece, they'd taught him an important lesson about family. Now it was time to show them what a good student he'd been. He dialed his phone as he walked to his car. Mr. Phillips, this is Michael. I need to meet with the managing partners at Jake's firm. It's about financial irregularities I've discovered. Yes, it's serious. Very serious. The trap was set. Now it was time to watch them fall. The DNA test results arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Michael sat in his car outside his parents' house, the envelope heavy in his hands. He'd collected the samples 2 weeks ago. His mother's coffee cup from Bridge Club, Jake's discarded water bottle from the gym, his father's used tissues from a conveniently timed visit to drop off old photo albums. His phone buzzed. A text from Martinez. Partners meeting started. Package delivered. Michael smiled grimly. Right now, Jake's law firm partners were opening a detailed dossier of his brother's financial fraud and witness tampering. But that was just the appetizer. The main course sat in his hands, sealed in a clinical white envelope. The lab's logo stared back at him as he carefully opened it. His hands didn't shake. He was past that now. 3 pages of scientific analysis confirmed what he'd suspected. He shared no DNA with either of his parents. Jake, however, was their biological child. His phone rang. Jake's name flashed on the screen. You son of a... Jake's voice trembled with rage. What did you do? Having a rough morning, brother. Michael kept his tone light. Or should I even call you that? The partners just suspended me. They're talking about an ethics investigation. Was this you? Karma's funny that way. How's that gambling debt working out for you? A sharp intake of breath. How did you? 200 grand is a lot of money, Jake. Especially when you're stealing it from your own firm. Tell me, did you think about that when you were sneaking around with my wife? Listen to me very carefully. Jake's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. You have no idea what you're doing. If you don't stop this right now, You'll what? Michael interrupted smoothly. Tell Mom. Go ahead. I'm heading there now anyway. Time for a family meeting. He hung up as Jake sputtered threats, then dialed another number. Detective Romano. Yes, this is Michael. Remember that evidence of financial fraud I mentioned? I just sent it to your office. You'll find everything you need to start an investigation. The front door opened as he walked up the path. His mother stood there, phone in hand, face flushed with anger. Jake just called. What have you done? Michael brushed past her into the house. We need to talk. If this is about your brother's firm, you've gone too far. Oh, shut up. The word cracked like a whip. He pulled out the DNA results. Let's talk about this instead. His mother's face went pale. What is that? Proof. He slapped the papers down on her precious antique coffee table. Proof that I'm not your son, that I never was. You had no right. No right. Michael's laugh was bitter. That's rich coming from the woman who bought a baby on the black market. His mother sank into her favorite armchair, pearls clutched in one hand. You don't understand. We wanted another child. But after Jake. Save it. Michael circled the room, past the family photos he'd never truly belonged in. Martinez found the original adoption records, the irregularities, the bribes. You didn't just adopt me. You stole me. We gave you everything. His mother's voice rose shrilly. A good home, education, opportunities. You gave me scraps. Michael whirled on her. Everything went to Jake. Your love, your attention, your pride. It all went to your real son. I was just a backup plan. The spare. That's not true. Then why help him steal my wife? Why cover for their affair? Why spend 34 years making me feel like I was never good enough? His mother's face hardened. Because you weren't. Jake has always been exceptional. You try so hard, but you'll never measure up. I thought having another child would be like having another Jake, but instead we got you. The words should have hurt, but Michael felt only cold satisfaction. He'd finally gotten the truth. Well, congratulations, he said softly. Your perfect son is about to be arrested for fraud. His law career is over. And this, he held up the DNA results. This is just the beginning. What are you planning? Fear crept into her voice. You taught me an important lesson, Mother. Family isn't about blood. It's about power, who has it, who doesn't, and what you're willing to do to keep it. He moved toward the door. I'm going to take everything from you and Jake. Your reputation, your standing in the community, your precious family name, all of it. You wouldn't dare, after everything we've done for you. Done for me. Michael's voice was deadly quiet. No, what you've done is create your own worst enemy. And now you get to watch as I tear down everything you've built. His mother stood, trembling. I'll stop you. Whatever it takes, I'll protect Jake. Like you protected him when he took my wife. Michael shrugged. Go ahead. Try to stop me. But remember this moment, when you chose him over me one last time. Because everything that happens next, it's on you. He walked out, leaving her clutching her pearls in her perfect living room. His phone buzzed again. Martinez, with an update about Jake's firm. The police were already on their way. Michael smiled as he got into his car. Phase 1 was complete. His brother's career was in ruins, his mother's world was cracking, and he was just getting started. They'd spent years making him feel like an outsider in his own family. Now they'd learned just how dangerous an outsider could be. Michael watched the evening news from his apartment, a glass of whiskey, untouched, beside him. On screen, Jake was doing the perp walk, suit jacket draped over his handcuffs as police led him from his law firm's building. His phone rang. His wife's name flashed on the screen. What have you done? Her voice shook with anger and fear. They're saying Jake embezzled money, that he tampered with evidence. All true. Michael cut her off. Every word of it. Your boyfriend's going to prison. You can't do this to him. I didn't do anything. Jake did this to himself. I just made sure everyone found out. He took a slow breath. But since you called, there's something else you should know. I'm not just divorcing you. I'm suing you and Jake for emotional distress and alienation of affection. You're what? She sounded genuinely shocked. Michael, be reasonable. Reasonable? He laughed. Like when you were sneaking around with Jake behind my back, or when you were plotting to have me declared mentally unstable. A sharp intake of breath. How did you? I have the recordings. You and my mother planning to steal my inheritance. A very thorough plan. Shame it's all falling apart now. Those conversations were private. Nothing's private anymore. Not for you, not for Jake, not for any of you. He stood, walking to his evidence wall. You know what the funny thing is? If you'd just been honest, filed for divorce like a normal person, none of this would be happening. But you had to do it the cruel way. You had to humiliate me. That's not what way. Save it. I've already sent copies of everything to your family. Your father was particularly interested in the recording where you discussed stealing my inheritance. Guess those Sunday dinners at your parents' house are going to be a bit awkward now. A sob caught in her throat. Please, Michael, we can work something out. Like you worked things out with Jake, behind my back. His voice hardened. The lawsuit papers will be delivered tomorrow. Oh, and since Jake's about to lose his law license, you might want to start looking for a good attorney. I hear the partners at his firm aren't feeling very charitable right now. He hung up as she began to plead, then dialed Martinez. How's our friend doing? Jake's looking at serious time, Martinez replied. The DA's building a strong case. Your brother's partners are cooperating fully. Turns out they don't appreciate being stolen from. And the gambling debts. His creditors are getting nervous. Without his job, without access to the firm's accounts. Martinez let the implications hang. Good. Michael checked his watch. What about the other matter? Your mother's been busy. Made 3 calls to her lawyer today, 2 to the family doctor. Looks like she's trying to build a case that you're mentally unstable, just like she planned. Michael smiled. Perfect. Keep monitoring everything. I want to know every move they make. After hanging up, he opened his laptop, checking his emails. The local society pages had already picked up the story of Jake's arrest. His mother's carefully cultivated social circle would be buzzing with gossip. The doorbell rang. Michael checked the security camera feed on his phone. His father stood in the hallway, looking older than Michael had ever seen him. He opened the door but didn't invite him in. Dad. Son. His father's voice was rough. We need to talk. About what? How you and Mom bought me on the black market, or how you stood by while she favored Jake all these years. His father flinched. I know you're angry. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. Michael leaned against the doorframe. Did you know about Jake and my wife? A long pause. No, not at first. When I found out, You did nothing. Just like always. Your wife is a manipulative sociopath who's about to learn some hard lessons about karma. Michael straightened up. Why are you really here, Dad? His father pulled an envelope from his jacket. Your mother doesn't know I'm here. These are the original adoption papers, the real ones, not the sanitized version we filed with the court. They show everything. How we got you, who helped cover it up. Michael took the envelope. Why give me this now? Because you deserve the truth, and because... His father looked away. Because I should have stood up for you years ago. Should have been a real father to you. It's too late for that. I know. His father's shoulders slumped. Just whatever you're planning next, remember that revenge won't fill the hole inside you. Michael studied the man who'd raised him, this weak, passive figure who'd let his wife poison their family for decades. No, it won't fill the hole. But it will make sure they feel exactly what they put me through. All of them. Son. I'm not your son. The DNA test proved that pretty definitively. Michael stepped back into his apartment. Go home, Dad. Tell Mom I got the papers, and tell her to watch her back, because I'm just getting started. He closed the door on his father's pained expression, then opened the envelope. The documents inside were a roadmap of corruption. Judges who'd been bribed, officials who'd looked the other way, biological parents who'd been coerced. His mother's fingerprints were all over it. Michael added the papers to his evidence wall, then poured himself another whiskey. On TV, they were replaying Jake's arrest, his brother's face a mask of shock and fear as officers led him away. The evening news anchor's voice filled the room. More developments in the growing scandal at Matthews & Partners law firm. Senior partner Jacob Matthews was arrested today on charges of embezzlement and witness tampering. Sources say the investigation may extend to other members of the firm. Michael raised his glass to the screen. Cheers, brother. Hope prison food agrees with you. His phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. Your mother's calling an emergency meeting of her charity board tomorrow. Want me to leak the adoption story to the press? Michael typed back. Not yet. Let her squirm a little longer. We're just getting to the good part. He walked to his window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, his mother was probably trying to manage damage control. His wife was crying to her family, and Jake was sitting in a cell, finally facing consequences for his actions. But this was just the beginning. He had more cards to play, more secrets to reveal. They'd torn his life apart piece by piece. Now he would return the favor. Michael stood in the observation room at the county jail, watching through one-way glass as Jake paced in his orange jumpsuit. His brother had been in custody for 3 days, and it showed. His usual polished appearance had crumbled into nervous exhaustion. "Your brother's requesting a meeting," the guard said. "Says it's urgent." "I bet he does." Michael nodded. "Let's give him what he wants." The metal door clanged shut behind him as he entered the visiting room. Jake's head snapped up, hope flashing across his face, before being replaced by careful calculation. "You look comfortable," Michael said, taking the seat across the table. "Cut the crap." Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You've made your point. Now get me out of here." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm your brother, damn it." Jake slammed his hand on the table. A guard shifted, watching closely. "You've had your revenge. Isn't this enough?" "Enough?" Michael's laugh was cold. "You slept with my wife, stole from your firm, and think 3 days in jail makes us even. I can make it right." Jake's voice took on a desperate edge. "The firm, they'll drop the charges if I pay everything back. Mom's willing to help with the money." "Of course she is. Her golden boy needs saving." "What do you want from me?" Jake's facade cracked further. "An apology." "Fine. I'm sorry. I never should have." "Spare me." Michael held up a hand. "You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." "The gambling debts," Jake whispered, glancing at the guards. "These people, they're not like your PI friend. They'll kill me if I can't pay." "Sounds like a personal problem." "Jesus Christ, Michael." Jake's voice rose. "You want to destroy me? Fine. But Mom's having a breakdown. Dad's a mess. Your wife is being sued for every penny she has." Michael smiled. "How's that going, by the way? Her family must be thrilled about the recordings." Jake slumped in his chair. "You've changed. The Michael I knew would never. The Michael you knew died the day he caught you and Mom in the backyard." He stood up. "You want to know the funny part? I found out I'm not even your real brother. Mom and Dad bought me. Explains a lot, doesn't it?" "What are you talking about?" "DNA doesn't lie, Jake, unlike this family." Michael moved toward the door. "Enjoy prison. I hear they love corrupt lawyers inside." "Wait." Jake's handcuffs rattled as he stood. "These people I owe money to. They'll come after the family, after Mom. Again, not my problem." Michael knocked for the guard. "You chose this path, brother. Now you get to walk it alone." Back in his car, Michael checked his phone. 3 missed calls from his mother, 2 from his wife, 1 from Martinez. He dialed the PI first. "Got something big," Martinez said without preamble. "Your mother's been busy. Made 4 calls to that adoption agency contact from 30 years ago, the one who helped arrange everything." "Yeah, guy named Reynolds. Still works there." "Here's the interesting part," Martinez continued. "He's on the board of your mother's favorite charity, the one she chairs." Michael smiled. "Let me guess, she's trying to buy his silence." "Bingo. Meeting set for tomorrow at the country club. Want me to make sure the press knows about it?" "No." Michael started his car. "I'll handle this one personally. Send me everything you have on Reynolds." Time to add another piece to the board. He drove to his office, where a wall of evidence had grown into a war room. Photos, documents, and sticky notes covering every surface, each piece a weapon in his arsenal of revenge. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "Please, we need to talk. I'm staying at my parents' house. Just give me one chance to explain." He ignored it, focusing instead on the latest addition to his wall, a photo of Thomas Reynolds, the adoption agency official who'd helped his mother buy him 34 years ago. The man looked exactly like what he was, a bureaucrat who'd spent decades profiting from other people's desperation. Michael's desk phone rang, his private line. "Mr. Matthews," a nervous female voice said. "Amanda from the Westbrook Country Club. Mrs. Matthews asked me to confirm your attendance at tomorrow's charity board meeting. She says it's vital you be there." "Did she now?" Michael leaned back in his chair. "Tell her I wouldn't miss it for the world." He hung up and pulled up his mother's charity organization on his laptop. The Westbrook Foundation for Children's Welfare. The irony was almost too perfect. His office door opened. Martinez walked in, carrying a thick folder. "Everything on Reynolds," the PI said, dropping the file on Michael's desk. "Guy's got skeletons in his closet going back decades. Used the adoption agency to run a nice little side business in baby brokering. Your mother wasn't the only one he helped, not by a long shot." Martinez tapped the folder. Reynolds kept records, detailed ones, insurance, in case anyone tried to expose him. But he missed one thing. Michael guessed. Martinez pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Your mother kept her own insurance. Found this in a safety deposit box she opened right after your adoption." Michael scanned the document, his smile growing colder. A confession. Reynolds admitted to everything in writing. The bribes, the forged papers, the threats to biological parents. "Your mother's smart," Martinez said. "She made sure she had leverage over everyone involved. And now we have leverage over all of them." Michael stood, gathering the papers. "Time to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. Mom wants to play charity queen. Let's see how she handles a very public dethroning." He spent the next hour reviewing Reynolds' files, building a precise picture of the man's crimes. 3 decades of selling babies to wealthy families, using his position at the adoption agency as cover. His mother was just one client among many, but tomorrow she'd be the one who brought it all crashing down. His phone buzzed again. His wife, still trying to reach him. He thought about their last conversation, her pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. She had chosen her side. Now she could share in Jake's downfall. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. His mother's carefully constructed social world was about to implode, taking her reputation, her power, and her precious charity with it. And Michael would be there to watch it burn. The game was entering its final phase. All the pieces were in place. Now it was time to deliver the killing blow. The Westbrook Country Club's boardroom gleamed with old money and privilege. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the mahogany table where 12 of the city's most influential people sat, all members of his mother's precious charity board. Michael noted the empty seat beside Thomas Reynolds, the adoption agency official who'd helped his mother buy him 34 years ago. His mother stood at the head of the table, pearls perfectly arranged, her social mask firmly in place despite the strain around her eyes. She faltered slightly when she saw Michael enter. "Michael," she recovered quickly, voiced honey-sweet, "I'm so glad you could join us." "Everyone, this is my son, My son," Michael interrupted, setting his briefcase on the table. "Your son? That's not what the DNA test says." A murmur ran through the board members. His mother's smile tightened. "This isn't the time or place." "Actually, it's exactly the right time and place." Michael turned to the board. "Did you know your chairwoman bought a baby on the black market? That she used this very charity to launder money for illegal adoptions?" Reynolds half rose from his chair. "Now see here." "Sit down, Tom." Michael's voice could have frozen fire. "Unless you want everyone to see the confession you signed 34 years ago, the one detailing how you threatened my biological parents." Reynolds collapsed back into his chair, face ashen. Michael pulled out a stack of documents. "In fact, why don't we review some interesting financial records? It seems the Westbrook Foundation has been a very busy organization." "This is outrageous," a board member protested. "Emma, what is he talking about?" His mother's composure cracked. "Michael, please." "Please what?" "Keep quiet about how you've used this charity to hide decades of crimes." About how you and Reynolds here have been selling babies to the highest bidder. He began distributing copies of documents around the table. Bank records, witness statements, Reynolds' written confession. Everything you need to understand exactly what kind of person has been running your charity. These documents are confidential. Reynolds sputtered. We're confidential, Michael corrected. Just like the records of all the other families you helped. Shall we talk about the Anderson case? Or the Williams adoption? How many lives have you ruined, Hom? The boardroom erupted in chaos. Members grabbed for the documents, exclaiming in shock as they read. His mother stood frozen, watching her carefully constructed world crumble. You can't do this, she whispered. I already have. Michael turned to the board. Oh, and before I forget, the police are on their way, along with reporters from every major news outlet in the city. I thought they might be interested in how the city's most prestigious children's charity has been facilitating illegal adoptions. As if on cue, camera flashes began lighting up the country club's windows. Sirens wailed in the distance. You're destroying everything. His mother's voice shook with rage. The foundation does good work. Like you did good work when you bought me. When you spent my entire life punishing me for not being Jake. He gestured to the board members, who were now frantically checking their phones, the confusion and panic palpable. I gave you everything, she cried. You gave me scraps. Michael's voice filled the room. Everything went to Jake. Your love, your attention, your pride. It all went to your real son. And when he decided to steal my wife, you helped him do it. The board members watched in stunned silence as decades of family drama exploded. Jacob is in prison, his mother spat. Isn't that enough revenge for you? Prison, a board member gasped. Emma, what is going on? Michael smiled coldly. Oh, you hadn't heard. Her precious Jake was arrested for embezzlement and witness tampering. He's facing 20 years. But that's not the best part. He turned to the board. Want to know what else your chairwoman's been up to? Like helping my wife and brother carry on an affair, or plotting to have me declared mentally unstable to steal my inheritance. Police officers began filing into the room. Detective Romano nodded to Michael as he approached Reynolds. Thomas Reynolds, we have some questions about your adoption practices. This is all a mistake, Reynolds stammered. Emma, tell them. Tell them. What? Michael cut in. How you two have been working together for decades. How many other families have paid for babies. How many other lives you've destroyed. His mother's face had gone ghost white. Michael, she pleaded, think about what you're doing. Think about the family. Family. Michael laughed. You mean the family that betrayed me? The family that conspired against me. That family. Camera crews pushed into the room, reporters shouting questions. The board members began gathering their things, trying to distance themselves from the scandal. Mrs. Matthews, is it true the foundation has been involved in illegal adoptions? Mr. Reynolds, did you facilitate black market baby sales? What about the allegations of embezzlement? Michael watched as his mother's social status evaporated in real time. Her carefully maintained image of philanthropic dignity crumbled under the weight of truth and camera flashes. The foundation is finished, he told her quietly. Your reputation is finished. Everything you built, every connection you cultivated, every lie you told, it's all coming down. Why? She whispered. Why go this far? Because you taught me an important lesson about family. Michael gathered his briefcase. You taught me that blood doesn't matter, power does. And now, he gestured to the chaos around them. Now you have none. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Oh, and Mom. Jake sends his regards from prison. Seems he's having trouble adjusting to life without his mommy to protect him. The last thing he saw as he walked out was his mother collapsing into a chair, her perfect world shattered beyond repair. Outside, reporters swarmed him, microphones thrust in his face. Mr. Matthews, can you comment on the allegations? What evidence do you have of illegal adoptions? Is it true your brother is in prison? Michael faced the cameras, ready to deliver the final blow. It was time to tell the world exactly what kind of person Emma Matthews really was. Time to ensure everyone knew the truth about the city's most respected charity chairwoman and her decades of secrets. The game was almost over, and he had won. 2 weeks after the charity board meeting, Michael stood in his office, watching the morning news. The anchor's voice filled the room as footage played of his mother being led from her house in handcuffs. In continuing coverage of the Westbrook Foundation scandal, Emma Matthews, former chairwoman of the prestigious children's charity, has been arrested on charges of fraud and conspiracy. This follows the earlier arrests of adoption agency official Thomas Reynolds and Mrs. Matthews' son, prominent attorney Jacob Matthews. His phone rang. "Martinez, quite a show you've put on," the PI said. "Your mother's arrest is all over the news. How's she handling it?" "Not well." Michael turned off the TV. Her lawyers pushing for house arrest, citing health concerns, but with Reynolds turning state's evidence. Amazing how quickly loyalty crumbles when people face prison, Martinez agreed. Speaking of prison, Jake's creditors are getting impatient. Word is they're planning to collect from your parents, since Jake's assets are frozen. "Not my problem anymore." "What about your wife?" "Living with her parents. The lawsuits destroyed her financially. Her father had to remortgage their house to pay the legal fees." Martinez paused. "She tried visiting Jake in prison yesterday. They denied her access. Seems Jake told the guards he doesn't want to see her anymore. Trouble in paradise." "More like reality setting in," Michael said quietly. "Prison has a way of changing perspectives." A knock at his office door interrupted them. "I'll call you back," Michael said, hanging up. His father stood in the doorway, looking aged beyond his years. "Can we talk?" Michael gestured to a chair. His father sat heavily, pulling out a folded newspaper. The headline screamed, "Charity chair arrested, decades of fraud exposed." "Your mother's lawyer called," his father said quietly. "They're offering a deal. If you drop the lawsuit against your wife, agree not to testify." "Not happening." "Son." "Michael," his father corrected himself, voice thick with regret. "Haven't they suffered enough?" Michael leaned forward. "Let's review what they've suffered, shall we? Jake's in prison for crimes he actually committed. Mom's facing charges for fraud she actually perpetrated. My wife's broke because she chose to betray me. How is any of that my fault?" "The family name." "Isn't my family name, is it?" Michael's eyes flashed. "The DNA test proved that clearly." His father slumped further. "We loved you. Maybe not. Maybe not the way we should have, but we did." "No, you didn't. You tolerated me. Mom resented me, and Jake saw me as something to compete with, then something to steal from. I should have stopped it," his father admitted. "Should have stood up to your mother years ago. But you didn't. You watched her favor Jake, watched her tear me down, watched her help them destroy my marriage. You watched everything and did nothing. I was weak." "Yes, you were." Michael stood. "And now you get to watch everything crumble. The house is being seized as evidence. Mom's social standing is destroyed. Jake's career is over. The family name you're so worried about, it's going to be synonymous with fraud and corruption." His father pulled out one more document. "There's something else you should know about your biological parents." Michael held up a hand. "Stop. I don't want to know. But they might want to meet you. Form a relationship." Michael laughed bitterly. "I've had enough family to last a lifetime." "They were good people," his father pressed. "Your mother and Reynolds. The threats they used. It's all coming out in the trial." Michael moved to the door. "Go home, Dad. Take care of Mom. She's going to need it when the press camping outside finally gets a comment from her." After his father left, Michael returned to his evidence wall. Most of the documents had served their purpose now, but he kept them as reminders. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "Please, we need to talk. My family's accounts are frozen. The lawsuit, we can work something out." He deleted the message without responding. Let her sit in her parents' house, dependent on their charity, watching her comfortable life slip away. Let her live with the consequences of her choices. His desk phone rang. Detective Romano. Thought you'd want to know, the detective said. Reynolds is talking. Gave us everything on the adoption scams. Your mother's going away for a long time. And Jake. The DA's offering 20 years with the evidence you provided about the witness tampering. He doesn't have much choice but to take it. Michael hung up and walked to his window. From his office, he could see the courthouse where Jake would be sentenced next week, the country club where his mother's empire had crumbled, the expensive neighborhood where his wife was hiding at her parents' house. All the pieces of their lives scattered and broken, just like they'd broken him. His secretary buzzed in. Mr. Matthews, a reporter from the Times on line 1. They want a comment about your mother's arrest. Tell them no comment, Michael said, turning from the window. I've said everything I need to say. That evening, Michael drove to his parents' house one last time. He parked across the street, watching as police evidence teams continued their search. Crime scene tape wrapped the property like Christmas ribbons. News vans lined the street, hungry for any glimpse of the disgraced society queen. The roses his mother had tended so carefully were wilting, untended since her arrest. The precious lawn where she'd hosted charity events was trampled by police boots and camera crews. The perfect facade she'd maintained for decades was cracking, revealing the rot beneath. This house, this shrine to family lies, had witnessed it all. His wife and brother's betrayal, his mother's manipulation, years of favoritism and cruelty disguised as love. Now it was just another crime scene. Michael smiled as he drove away. They had created this outcome themselves, with every lie, every betrayal, every moment they'd made him feel like an outsider in his own family. He'd just shown them what a real outsider could do. The game was over, and he had won. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.